Welcome to Secrets Unlocked. If you enjoy intimate confessions and forbidden stories, check the private archive linked in the description. Subscribe, settle in, and enjoy the story. A tint of orange was already in the sky as Mark and Helen drove along the lake. Being the middle of fall, the days were already noticeably shorter. The roads were mostly devoid of traffic, which was certainly welcome to the young couple. Their honeymoon was an unusual one. Instead of traveling to a gorgeous beach in a tropical climate, they had instead opted for a very remote, very lonely stay in the near wilderness of northern Michigan. They still planned to hit the beaches in Cancun or Key West, but they decided that trip would be best during the coming cold winter. For now, their trip consisted of a week in a private cabin nestled deep in the woods for a week, followed by 3 days of driving along the shore of Lake Superior before catching a plane and heading home. Helen snuggled close to her new husband. A permanent smile graced her lips as she took in the scenery. The stay in the cabin had been wonderful and romantic, but the scenery had actually grown to familiarity, and there was something wonderful about wondering what they would encounter around each turn and in each town. The first day of the trip was behind them, and now the second was drawing to a close as the fall sun was starting to approach the western horizon. With no schedule to meet, except their plane ride home, Mark and Helen took their stops at leisure. They did have bookings in 3 separate hotels along the journey, but the check-in times were extremely flexible. So when they approached a series of old-fashioned homes and found themselves on a main street with the quaintest shops, they eagerly parked their SUV and got out to explore. The number of people was low, but there was still some life moving up and down the street. Being after Labor Day, the prime tourist season was over. But the weather was unusually warm, summer weather really, and the people basked in the late-season sun in shorts and t-shirts. Evidently, most of the people were locals. Helen reasoned as she noticed the people stop their motions and start in her and Mark's direction. Apparently, they were surprised to see them. Regardless, a number of them approached Mark and Helen offering hellos and how-do-you-dos. "Where are you from?" they asked. Mark and Helen answered. "Why are you here so late in the year?" They explained a little about their honeymoon. Congratulations flowed readily, and Helen half expected one of the older women to invite them for dinner. Instead, a stranger question arose from a man who had mostly remained silent. He was a younger man, at least compared to the others. He was also dressed much more formally in a suit and tie. Atop his head was a black derby hat. "Have you been to our gift shop?" he inquired. Mark and Helen both answered no. The other townsfolk grew quiet after the question and looked at the man in the derby. "You really should go, they have some lovely things." Yes, lovely things, a few of the others joined in. "Go to the gift shop, you're sure to find something very nice." "They would love to have you," the man in the derby added, seemingly addressing Helen directly. "Okay," Mark smiled. "We will check it out. Where is it?" The crowd pointed in unison over Mark's shoulder. About 40 yards away was a very nice old-looking house. It appeared to be near the edge of a cliff of sorts, as the reflecting light of Lake Superior flashed in their eyes from behind the shop. "Shall we?" Mark offered his arm to Helen. She took it with a grin and waved goodbye to the strangers. She chuckled together at the blatant attempt for tourist dollars. Without speaking, they assumed the same thing in that all they would find would be cheap trinkets and postcards. They entered the gift hop, giddy with the delight of exploration and the romance of the honeymoon. Sure, they would buy something as a remembrance of the trip and the friendly locals. The house itself was completely charming, right down to the white picket fence surrounding the property. The shop seemed mostly empty, but they did notice a few people browsing the items. In addition, they noticed an older woman, probably the owner, behind a register. She was smiling at them, as if she could recognize and share in their joy from one glimpse. She didn't speak at first, not until Mark and Helen took a few more steps into the store and broke their eyes from each other long enough to survey the multitude of collectibles surrounding them. "Hello," they said with a particularly broad smile. Her eyes seemed lit up and her face full of excitement. Mark reasoned they must have looked like surefire customers for the woman to be so pleased with their arrival. Mark and Helen returned the greeting and then made their way about the store. They didn't look with any particular interest. They just noted the wind chimes, the cuckoo clocks, the coasters, and the many other items to themselves. Mark secretly hoped he could find some little memento, some symbolic purchase, that his new wife would cherish the rest of their lives. But he didn't want her to see him buy it. He released her hand nonchalantly, and she seemed interested in some blankets she was eyeing down a flight of stairs in the other section of the shop. She moved to the short flight of steps, and Mark knew he had a golden opportunity. He rationalized he should just go to the old woman and ask if they had anything particularly wonderful buried in all their junk. He stepped over to her. He was about to speak, but she hadn't turned to face him. She was still watching Helen. Intently, Mark waited a moment, and still the woman did not break her gaze. Perhaps she was concerned with shoplifters, Mark reasoned. He decided to search for the memento on his own. He turned his back to the woman and started to walk away. "You have a very lovely wife." Mark turned to her, figuring she would now be able to help him. She was still staring at Helen, almost as if she was analyzing her. "Thank you," Mark returned to his search. Helen, meanwhile, had been examining the soft blankets that lined several shelves. She didn't rally plan to buy one, unless she found just the right combination of colors and softness. "May I help you find anything?" Helen looked over her shoulder to the old man who had just walked up to her. "No, thanks, I'm just browsing." "I see. Well, please feel free to ask for any assistance." "Thank you, I will." Helen smiled the man, but he didn't notice it. He was watching her intently. The fact this old shopkeeper was staring at her made her somewhat uncomfortable. She returned to examining the selection of blankets. "You know, we do have another room of merchandise, if you fail to find anything here that interests you." "Really? I thought this and the upper level were the whole store." "Most of the time they are, my dear. Most of the time they are. Please follow me." Helen was a little confused by his statement but followed as asked. The man led her to a door that had an employees-only sign above it. Had the man been younger and had her new husband not been with her, Helen would have never followed him. But as it was, she felt little threat from the shopkeeper, even as he had to unlock the door to gain entrance. She did, however, stay back until he turned the light in the room on, and she saw that sure enough. There were shelves and displays and merchandise in the room. She followed him in. The door shut behind them, and the old man put his hand on Helen's shoulder. But it was a nice, friendly old man way. "Please feel free to take your time. I'm sure you can find something in here that you will like." Helen stepped away as the man stayed at the door. She wondered why they kept part of the store locked off from their customers, but the answer became evident as she really looked at the items for sale. The first to catch her eye were some little sculptures. They appeared well-crafted and professional, but each figured a couple in differing adult positions. Helen wanted to laugh a bit and wondered if the old man had sculpted them himself. One thing she was certain of: he got more than a little pleasure by bringing attractive young women into the room and displaying his merchandise. She looked around the rest of the room. She started walking as she gazed at the items for sale. The sculptures went from those of couples to those of larger groups. "I'm sorry, I don't think anything here interests me." "Are you sure? What about over here?" He led Helen to the next aisle. The shelves here were lined with adult novelty items. "These models are especially unique," he said calmly, explaining their specific functions. His face had taken an eerie look to it. It frightened Helen. His look was plenty disquieting. "I'd better be going," she said, and headed for the main area of the store. The old man followed close behind. Mark was close to the door and smiled as he saw his wife. Helen didn't stop her movement. "Ready to go?" she asked. Mark stood as she brushed by him. He was about to insist that she stop and explain her hasty exit when the old man's hand came to rest on his shoulder. "You have a very lovely wife." Mark looked at the man and quickly deduced he had somehow made his wife uncomfortable. He quickly left to join her. Helen was laughing about the situation before long. She explained the strange figures and items to her husband. He laughed as well, figuring the old man still had the urge to get a reaction somehow. "You are really very lovely," Mark teased as they sped down the road. "Oh really? Why thank you." Mark looked at his wife. She was lovely, gorgeous. He had thought so the moment he laid eyes on her, had fallen in love with her shortly after that. Helen was a striking brunette. Her long black hair swept down onto her shoulders, and she had an elegant, tall figure that rivaled those of any woman he had ever seen. The staring and attention from others was nothing new. Men loved to look at his wife. "I bet he was picturing you," Mark teased. "You," Helen smiled back at him. Mark paused, then took a moment's glance at his wife. "I'm picturing you too," he said. "Really?" Helen's smile broadened. As they drove, the atmosphere between them grew playful and affectionate, their mutual attraction building as they continued down the road together. Mark pulled over to the side of the road. The traffic was non-existent. Mark climbed into the back of the SUV and lowered the seats. Helen climbed back to join him. In that moment, the boundary between them was crossed. Then they heard a rapping. Mark looked over his shoulder. A police officer was at the driver's side window. The flashing of his police lights hit Mark in the eyes. Mark scrambled to the front seat. The officer was looking back towards them. "Everything okay here?" the officer asked Mark. Yes, fine, officer." The officer leaned his head in the open window. He looked at Helen, then turned back to Mark. "I'm sure you two have a room somewhere." Mark nodded. "I suggest that in the future you wait to have your fun until you get off the road and back to your room." "Sorry, officer, I got a little carried away." The cop looked back in the open window at Helen. The officer turned back to Mark. "I can see why." He looked again at Helen, then back at Mark. "You have a very lovely wife. Tell you what, where are you staying?" Mark told him their hotel. The officer motioned for him to wait and went to his car. He came back in a moment. The time gave Helen a chance to adjust her clothing. When the officer returned, he again looked at Helen. She knew he was looking at her. She began to think of what he could make them do if he abused his power. "Here, it's a gift certificate for your hotel restaurant. Free dinner. We sometimes pass them out to tourists." "How'd you know we were tourists?" Mark asked, taking the coupon. After all, his plates were from Michigan. "Oh, I just assumed. Mark and Helen returned to their hotel. They raced to their room. In that room, the remaining boundaries between them vanished, and they fully surrendered to their mutual affection. Afterwards, Mark couldn't imagine feeling any more happy and in love than he did at that moment. His heart ached with the passion he felt for his bride. Everything seemed more beautiful when on or near his wife. In that afternoon, the boundary between them was crossed. Afterward, they collapsed beside each other, lying in bed for a good while, slowly kissing. Eventually, they forced themselves up, put their clothes back on, and headed for the hotel's restaurant. Mark waited for his bride outside the restaurant entrance. His heart felt warm as he thought about Helen and his luck. Mark wasn't dumb. He knew he had a beautiful wife, and while he was by no means unattractive, he was not her male equal in the looks department. He knew people thought she could do better, at least in terms of finding someone more handsome, and that's part of why he felt so lucky. Helen wasn't mired in trying to have the best-looking husband. And in truth, he wasn't mired in having to have a trophy wife. Helen's physical beauty was simple and bonus to her character. She was intelligent, loyal, fun-loving, and all in all, a wonderful person. He couldn't help but love her. Mark moved to a small garden to his right. The hotel was filled with plants and trees, creating a very tropical atmosphere. Plenty of glass allowed plenty of light, and little fountains created flowing streams of water throughout the lobby. Mark gazed at a tree just a few inches from him. Feeling romantic, he took out a small pocket knife and began to carve on the trunk, looking around first to make sure no one saw what A was doing. He simply carved H and M, stood back, and smiled. Helen came out of the bathroom and kissed her new husband after seeing his handiwork. "I love you," she breathed into his ear. Mark felt his devotion for his bride swelling in him again. They made their way inside, and were greeted by a friendly waiter. Mark decided on steak right away, but Helen was studied her menu for quite some time, giving Mark a chance to examine the dining area, which was almost as nice as the lobby. Mark noticed his waiter across the room. The waiter, like many of the men they had encountered recently, was taking long stares at Helen. Mark figured that the rural area rarely had such beautiful women, but it still began to anger him. The waiter actually seemed pleased when he came back to take their order and saw the coupon the officer provided. He brought out a fancy bottle of wine in addition to their order, indicating the couple must finish it all in order to receive the meal free. Mark assumed he was joking. As they grew tipsy with the alcohol, Mark became less and less aware of the staring waiter or the other waiters who came by to check on them. But they never looked at Mark, they only looked at Helen. They poured the wine for her, asked what else they could do for her, and even escorted her to the ladies' room. While she was gone, the manager even came by the table. He did look at Mark and spoke a single sentence. "You have a very lovely wife." Helen found it hard to wake up the next morning. Her mind was partially aware of her surroundings, but most of the time in oblivious slumber. One thing kept creeping into her subconscious thoughts, however. A strange, uneasy feeling that the length of the night was unusually long. She didn't mind long nights. She rather enjoyed any chance for extra sleep that she got, but something didn't seem right about this. She could have sworn at one point the room was light, too light for the early morning. But after a much later semi-aware moment, it seemed as dark as the night had ever been. Her impaired mind rationalized even in her sleep. Dreams, just different dreams. She couldn't force herself awake anyway. The sleep had too strong a hold on her. Eventually, the sleep gave way to wakefulness. Her arms felt incredibly heavy as she pulled the sheet from her body. Mark was still sleeping. He was face down in the pillow, completely unmoving except for the slight rise of his back with each breath. Helen sat up in the bed for a long moment, trying to shake the cobwebs from her mind. She did feel well-rested, just dazed. They had returned to their room the night before, emotional and exhausted after a long evening. She smiled at the thought and hoped Mark would soon awaken. Eventually, she arose from bed and moved over to the dresser at the far side of the room. She brushed the flowing blonde hair from her face and examined her eyes. She instantly found faults in her early morning face that no other person would identify. She felt the urge to shower and redo her makeup lest her husband see her so unbeautiful. She reached her hands behind her back to undo the clasp on her white bra. She quickly realized it was a front clasp bra and attributed the mistake to her sleepiness. She moved towards the bathroom. After entering, she turned on the shower and prepared to step in. But she froze. Her eyes looked down at her clothes. She didn't know how they got on. Her mind clearly recalled the previous night's events, and she vividly recalled falling asleep without these clothes on. Her first thought was that either she had awoken to dress herself or that perhaps her husband had. She stood there next to the open shower, trying to remember the events perfectly. It was one thing if she had been dressed in the night without her memory, but it was still odd that she hadn't been dressed in the pink undergarments she had worn the day before. Yes, she was certain she was wearing pink when she was in the room earlier. Sure of it. And Helen felt even more confused. She was wearing a white satin set, a front clasp bra. Helen didn't own a white front clasp bra. Helen darted back into the bedroom to confirm. She opened the top drawer of the dresser, the same drawer she had placed her undergarments in the day they arrived. It was empty. She opened the drawer underneath. Empty. Helen opened each subsequent drawer to find that not a single article of clothing remained except for the panties she had on and the bra that was draped across the sink. Someone had taken everything. Mark, wake up." Mark stirred slightly, but didn't awake. Helen continued to search the room as she screamed to her husband. Her assumptions of robbery were changed as she realized every other belonging was still present in the room. Mark's watch, their laptop, their cell phone. Who would come in and steal only their clothes? Helen shook her husband hard, but still he didn't wake up. Helen grabbed the phone, beginning to wonder if her husband was seriously ill. She dialed the front desk, ready to plead for help, but the line never picked up. Helen alternated between dialing the phone and shaking her husband over the next few minutes. Neither effort resulted in success. Helen began to panic. She dialed 9 on the phone, hoping to get an outside line and call for help herself. But the line was dead. The fearful thought began to grow inside Helen's mind. If she wanted help, she would have to leave the room. Helen stood up and headed for the door. Realizing she was uncovered, Helen took a moment to snatch her bra and refasten it. That was the last concern she had for her modesty. She opened the door and ran into the hallway. She went directly to the front desk, but no one was behind it. She began exploring the hotel in her underwear, looking for any sign of human life. There was none. She was in complete panic now. Helen ran back into the hallway and began knocking on room doors. She knocked hard 1-1, screaming for help. No one came to the door, not a single person in any of the rooms. Helen fell to the middle of the floor and wept. She felt completely confused and afraid. What the hell was going on? What was happening? She prayed Mark was awake. She rushed back to her own room, noting the room numbers on the doors as she passed. Finding hers, she opened the door to her bedroom and ran to the bed. Mark was unconscious and foaming at the mouth. Helen shrieked. She brushed the hair from her new husband's face and kissed him, but he still wasn't waking. Her heart pounding, Helen hugged her husband and had only one thought of what to do. She had to leave the hotel. She had to go outside to find help. Still dressed in only a white panties and a white, front-clasping bra, Helen again ran down the hallway, this time past the front desk and to the main doors of the hotel. The early morning sun was slightly blinding to her as she stepped outside. She ran past the drop-off curb and into the parking lot. But there were no cars. Helen turned to look at the hotel from which she had just run. It wasn't theirs. Mark stood at the front desk, dressed only in his jeans. He needed to speak with anyone, but the desk was vacant at the moment. He was still trying to get his bearings. He had woken up with a heavy feeling of grogginess. He had felt for his bride, but discovered she was not in the bed next to him. The bathroom. He had figured. When he finally gained the strength to look for her, he discovered she was gone. He assumed she must be down the hall, getting something from a vending machine or something. Still, she hadn't returned. Could she have left me? Mark wouldn't accept the thought. He knew his bride loved him as much as he loved her. He knew they were soul mates. She wouldn't leave him. Still, he checked their drawers. They were empty. None of Helen's clothes or suitcases were in the room. Feeling the tension build? Thousands of more private stories are waiting in my exclusive archive. The link is in the channel description. He might have panicked at this point as he started to believe the unbelievable, but one fact saved him from self-torment. None of his clothes or luggage were there, either. He struggled hard to remember the previous day's events. Could he have somehow gotten in the wrong room? Mark studied the surroundings carefully. Everything looked as though he remembered it. He even saw the tree from the previous night where he had carved his and Helen's initials. With the front desk still vacant, Mark decided to take the short walk over to the tree and re-examine his work. But the markings weren't there. Mark studied every inch of the tree. It appeared to be the same one. The size and shape were exactly what he remembered, but no carvings. Could he be someplace else? He had to be. "Excuse me," Mark asked when an attendant greeted him. "This is going to sound strange, but can you tell me where I am?" "Certainly, sir. That doesn't sound strange at all." "Well, I'm a little confused. I went to bed with my wife in our room last night, only to wake up here." "What's so strange about that, sir?" "This is a different hotel?" Mark was sure this was the case. Naturally, his first concern was the location of his wife, who was not at his side in bed, not in the room, and so far not in the hotel. He assumed she was in the correct hotel, and somehow he had wound up here. "Sir, I can assure you, this is the same hotel. I have you as checking in on last Thursday, is that correct?" "Yes, we got to our hotel last Thursday. But it wasn't this place. Our room has no luggage, no clothes or supplies. I carved initials on that tree over there and now they're gone. Everything else is the same, like this place was made from the same plans, but this is not the same hotel." Well, sir, I've been in every day since last Thursday, and this place hasn't changed in that time. Perhaps you don't remember things clearly. You are on your honeymoon. Well, it was a magical night, but not that magical. Something is going on here, and I intend to find out. Certainly, sir. Mark turned away in disgust, but was unsure of what direction to walk in. Nevertheless, he began walking with a determined stride. By the way, sir, the bellhop called to him. Yes. You have a very lovely wife. Helen was now blocks away from the hotel. Still, she hadn't seen a soul, considering her skimpy state of dress that was fine with her. The issues at hand were more important than anything else. For all she knew, she had been drugged by God knows who and her husband left for dead. She had to find help. She wondered how Mark was doing if he had woken up. Who knew what was wrong with him? Who knew if he was even going to live? Helen bit her lip and sobbed as the worry for her new husband swelled within her. God, she loved him. Nothing could have happened to him, could it? And nothing would happen to her, would it? Mark wasn't sure what to feel. His mind was a blend of panic, anger, and frustration. As he neared the doors of the hotel, he swore to himself that he would find Helen, then worry about what actions to take against those who had created the situation. Unfortunately, those plans were immediately called into question. Mark opened the doors of the hotel and realized, quite profoundly, that he didn't know where he was. He already knew that his was not the hotel he had been staying at with his wife for that past 4 days, but it was the town, either. He ran into the street, hoping to see something that would give him a sense of bearing. After all, he had only been walking the streets for 4 days, but nothing was familiar. A few turns in each direction confirmed his lack of placement. He started down a street, looking for something or somebody that could give him some sense of what was going on. He walked about a block before noticing a black limousine had pulled up next to him. It was creeping along very slowly, just fast enough to catch him, but it was obvious that whoever was inside intended to speak with Mark. The window came down, and a man wearing a black derby hat poked out. "Hello, sir, good morning." Mark replied with an understated good morning. "Are you enjoying your stay in our quiet little town?" "Actually, I'm not staying." "Oh no," Mark was continuing to walk. The limo kept perfect pace with him. "We have much to offer here, you know, much to offer." "Well, I'd best be on my way." Mark was in no mood for a casual chat. "I'm sure it's quite a lovely place, but—" "Yes, very lovely, and full of lovely people. I really think you should remain, you and your very lovely wife." Mark froze. "My wife? Would you like to come inside?" The man motioned towards Mark. "Do you know where my wife is?" "Come inside, sir, we'll talk." "I'm not sure I want to. It's never been a habit of mine to accept rides from strangers." Another man appeared in the window. "I'm afraid you have no choice." The statement startled Mark, and he was a little slow to get moving. The men were out of the car in a flash. Before he could hit full stride, Mark felt the 2 men clutching at his sleeves. He struggled, but felt a needle push into his arm. The men let go, but Mark was already down to 1 knee. His vision blurred as he looked at his attackers, both dressed in black derby hats. Mark went down to his 2nd knee, and the last image he had was that of the sidewalk a few inches from his face. Mark felt the tug of restraints on his arms as consciousness returned to him. He was no longer outside, nor was he in the limo. He was in a plain, dimly lit room. The men in the derby hats were there. It was only moments before they realized he was awake. "Hello again, Mark." It was the one who addressed him on the street. Mark didn't answer. "I'm sorry we had to bring you here under such unusual terms, but I'm afraid it was absolutely necessary." "What's going on? Are you kidnapping me?" "Oh no, Mark, oh no." Mark wondered how they knew his name, but felt with all the other weird things happening that it was a small matter. "We are merely occupying you for a while." Mark looked around the room, but saw nothing to help him gain his bearings. "Is my wife here?" "Helen, no, Helen is not here." So they knew his wife too, her name anyway. "Helen is not here anymore." Mark's body tried to leap up out of the chair, but restraints held him firmly in place. In a flash, He imagined Helen's terror at being abducted and his inability to help her. He made his whole body ache. Relax, Mark, relax. Where is she? Did you hurt her? If you did. Your wife is fine, Mark. Believe me when I say we had no intention of harming her. In fact, we rather significantly enjoyed her company. Where is she? She's in town, my friend. In town, she's being quite well taken care of. What do you want from us? Is it money? No, we don't want money. There are much greater assets to be had. Mark's brow curled at the comment. What assets? What it boils down to is this, the man said without looking at Mark. We want your wife. We want her to come and live here with us. We want her to take her place in our community. I don't understand. The man turned and faced Mark. Your wife is very beautiful, exquisitely beautiful. Our town has a special fondness for such beauty. We want your wife, Mark, so we can incorporate her into our lifestyle. Mark was stunned. He stared back at the man, open-mouthed. The women in our community, the man continued, are free to any resident, as are the men. It is a duty to provide companionship. The same goes for the men, but what? Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. But we're not on that committee. The man laughed as he said it. There is a group of women responsible for the task of choosing the men. So you want us to move to your town to participate in what's basically a communal arrangement. No, Mark, we want your wife for that arrangement. We don't choose the men. And, unfortunately for you, the committee for obtaining men doesn't want you. You're just not attractive enough. How you got Helen to marry you has surprised us all. Mark almost felt offended. Well, guess what? You can't have her. You say you don't want me. Well, I am sure that she doesn't want you. You may be right, Mark, but she will. What do you mean? Our committees simply don't ask people to join or community. Well, sometimes they ask the men. Men are so much easier to convince to join us than the women. Anyway, we have our means of persuasion. You see, we've already spent quite a bit of time with your wife, Mark. Quite a bit of time. You're lying. Am I? Then I suppose I'd be lying when I tell you that I saw Helen when she was brought here. I'm the one who handled her belongings. And I suppose I'd be lying when I told you that I noticed the little mole on her right hip. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Could he have guessed that? He realized how easily they had drugged him, and of course the fact that Helen was nowhere to be found when he awoke. If they did have her, their taking advantage of her was a logical outcome. Mark began to cry. God damn you, God damn you. You have a very lovely wife. Did you hurt her? Mark asked, fearing the worst. Now how would that help us, Mark? We want your wife to want to join us, not fear us. We could have forced her. Easily. But her heart wouldn't have been into it. Not her soul. We want your wife, Mark, body and soul. That is accomplished by making her realize that this is the one place in the world where she can be most happy. And do you know how we do that, Mark? Do you? No. By making her desires come true. That's it. What desires? The ones deep inside her, Mark. The ones that curl up deep, deep in her mind and occasionally surface. The ones that are so private that she hasn't even shared them with you. The ones that make her want to live completely differently, Mark. I know my wife, I know her thoughts, I think I know what she wants. Well, we'll see about that. You don't have the power that we do, Mark, nor the experience. You may think you're a great partner, but you can't compete with what she really wants. And what is that? What does she want that she hasn't told me? I'm glad you asked that, Mark, because it's just about time to give her some of what she wants. You see, we had her for quite some time. All of yesterday as a matter of fact. What are you talking about? We were together all day yesterday. That was the day before yesterday, my friend. You went to bed that night and didn't wake up until just a little while ago. We saw to that. And while you were taking your nice long nap, we took you from your hotel room. We brought lovely Helen here. Fuck you. Anyway, we put your wife into a nice state of relaxation. We have the best men for that sort of thing. A nice, deep state. She was awake, but not herself. She was stripped of all conscious knowledge of her surroundings, who she was. We spoke with the subconscious part of her, the part full of hidden thoughts and needs. I will tell you this, Mark, you have satisfied her quite well, all things considered, but not completely. Not like we can. She told us all her deepest desires, the ones that make her feel unfulfilled. Shut up, please shut the fuck up. I will in just a moment, because then we have a little TV for you to watch. In a few minutes, we'll be enacting one of your wife's desires. Of course, she won't know it, she won't even consciously recognize it, but her mind will. Her mind will come alive for reasons she doesn't even know. Now, please watch. A screen lit up across from Mark. He saw Helen. She was walking. The camera was zoomed in on her face, and Mark could see the fear and worry in her features. The camera started to pull back. What have you done with her clothes? It's what she wants, Mark. Oh, you mean you didn't know about this desire? She never told you she fantasized about being noticed and admired in public. She's got a little exhibitionism in her, Mark. Being stared at by men excites her. Did you know that? Mark was silent. The man drew in close. Did you know she has hidden thoughts, that when she is alone she thinks of other possibilities? Oh, she doesn't let herself think the thought that clearly. She feels too guilty, but her heart wanders. She could have a different life, and though she married you, a different experience is exactly what her heart wants. Mark refused to respond. He stared at the screen ahead, convinced the man's words were meant only to hurt him and did not have any truth. Helen had fantasies, of course, and probably some she didn't share. But she loved him and would never desire attention from other men. Now, this scenario actually leads to another one, Mark. Let's see if you can figure out what it is. I hope you enjoyed this story. More intimate confessions are waiting in the private archive linked in the description. Subscribe for the next story.